It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. Now, you can get a hold of me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting. Just reach out to me through my email, oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. Today we have Peter Janney. Now, you can find him at marysmosaic.net. And the book we're talking about today is called Mary's Mosaic, The CIA Conspiracy to Murder John F. Kennedy, Mary Pinchot Meyer, and Their Vision for World Peace. This is the third edition of the book, just came out by Peter Janney. This is a fascinating story about how this woman was murdered, and they came up with this crazy story about how this guy just happened to be walking out of prison, out of jail, and just on a spur of the moment just starts murdering people. But there's a lot more, and good old James Angleton comes up in the story. There's a lot to this story. So, Mr. Peter Janney, are you there?
I am indeed. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are.
Yeah, it's afternoon, 12:07. So I'd say that's afternoon. Before we get into your book here, Mary's Mosaic, The CIA Conspiracy to Murder John F. Kennedy and Mary Pinchot Meyer, tell us about yourself. Who is Peter Janney?
Well, I grew up in Washington, D.C. My dad was a very prominent official in the Central Intelligence Agency. I knew the woman, Mary Pinchot Meyer, very well because she was my best friend's mother while I was growing up. And actually, my mother and Mary Meyer went to college together. They were in the same class together. And so socially, our families were very close. And as with a number of other Washington families who are, kind of in the intelligence world. So I have a lot of experience with what I wrote about. Of course, it still took me many, many years to put the book together in the way that, I wanted to. But I do think it's a very worthwhile read in the sense that it records a period of history in the late 1960s that I think was, a very particular time in our country. And as we all, in one form or another, know, the late 1960s was a very tumultuous, kind of uprooting time in our country. There was a lot going on, a lot of demonstrations in college, that kind of thing. So the story is really important. It represents a certain historical period that today still has ramifications for what is going on.
Growing up in D.C., especially, now you grew up in those kind of activist times in the 70s?
Yes.
That must have been something, because my daughter just graduated American University in D.C., and people don't realize it really is a small town. You know what I mean? You get right. You're in contact with all the people in power there. If you want to get an idea, a little bit of an idea about Peter Janney, check out the marysmosaic.net about Peter Janney. A real dapper dresser. You're a very very stylish fellow there. So go there and check out these pictures of Mr. Janney. Very stylish guy, the way you dress, man. Very nice. I like that. So you grew up in D.C. around this time, and your family actually knew Mary Pinchot Meyer, and your dad was CIA.
And Mary's husband, Cord Meyer, was also CIA. So, my father and Cord Meyer went to work at CIA every day. My mother and Mary Meyer, were part of a kind of larger social kind of ruling class network in Washington. And, these families stuck together. I mean, we had a swimming pool when no one else did, and, there were always pool parties in late spring into summer. and the Meyer kids, Angleton's family, any number of other prominent people would be there, that kind of thing. So yeah, it was a rock'em sock'em kind of crowd.
Yeah, and springtime in D.C. is beautiful too as well. Cherry blossom season, all that stuff, man. So why don't you give us let's start like this. So many of my guests. First, tell us the official story. What's the official story of Mary Pinchot Meyer and her relationship with John F. K. and her death? And then tell us what really happened.
Well, the official story is it is now acknowledged. I mean, there isn't any denial of the fact that JFK and Mary Meyer were very much in love with one another, okay? And of course, this was while he was married to Jackie. As history would have it, there's a whole kind of legacy out there of JFK's sexual escapades, all of which are to a very large degree realistic. I mean, JFK had a lot of problems emotionally, and he was promiscuous sexually for a large part of his life. That's just part of who he was. But there was something very, very special about his connection with this woman, Mary Meyer. They first met at a prep school dance before he was in college and before she was in college. She was 15 years old. He was like 17 or 18. He had gone to this very posh prep school called Choate, which is located in Wallingford, Connecticut. And so, that's where they first met, and she made such an impression upon him that he never forgot her. She was not that much taken with him. She just looked at him as sort of a playboy type. But as they got older, they developed something quite unique. And most historians of that period now acknowledge Mary Meyer as a very important person in JFK's life.
Wasn't she the one, too, that there was some LSD involved in the story?
Yes. She was a big proponent of, psychedelic inquiry, psychedelic experience. And because of her interest in being an artist, which she was, she hung out with people who were really on the cutting edge of self-exploration. So when LSD became kind of a phenomenon that it was in the late 60s, of course, she wanted to explore it, and she did.
And is she the one who introduced it to JFK?
Yes, they did. It is pretty much documented that in the spring of 1963, they took a mild dose of the psychedelic psilocybin together. Okay. And Mary had quite a bit of experience with psychedelics because, her son, who was my best friend, he was killed and hit by a car and killed in the late 1950s, and it was a really devastating event. It certainly was for me, but I mean, of course, just for the family as well. But she talks about how her use of psychedelics really allowed her to deal with a level of grief that nothing else would even touch. And so I think she was instrumental in explaining this reality to JFK, and he was very, very intrigued by it.
Yeah, and now today they're talking about the microdoses of psychedelics being used for depression and things like that. So it is kind of an accepted theory, at least.
Yes, it is. Yes.
What was her background as far as...
We don't want to lose sight of this. Psychedelics are a big revolutionary turning point in the field of mental health these days. It's been extremely helpful for certain kinds of depression. It has been particularly judicious for soldiers coming back from combat who are having a lot of difficulty integrating what they had to experience during combat and war. So there is this field now in clinical psychology and psychiatry of the use of psychedelics to promote deeper levels of mental health.
That's right, because I forgot that you're a psychiatrist too as well, right?
Clinical psychologist.
Psychologist. Well, for a layman like me, it's the same thing. We don't know, right? But it's just fascinating. More and more, I'll have a guest on, and I'll flippantly, mention this, and they seem so enthusiastic about the benefits of this kind of treatment. You feel the same way?
Yes.
Oh, great.
Oh, absolutely. I still, use psychedelics. I would say once or twice a year.
Really?
My favorite at the moment is a substance called MDMA.
Sure.
Which is a very, very mild psychedelic, but it's also been kind of the substance that modern day psychiatry and psychology have, really examined quite closely in terms of its impact and its helpfulness in any number of situations.
Not to get too off topic of this book, which is an excellent book, great reviews, Mary's Mosaic, the CIA conspiracy to murder JFK, and Mary Pinchot Meyer and their vision for world peace. But I'm 63 years old. I grew up in New York City, and I used to hang out with the yippies on the Lower East Side back in the 70s. So I have some experience with psychedelics myself. But I had a bad experience at a very young age, about 19 years old, and I that was it. I swore off it. And I've been afraid to go back and try to travel down that road again. What would you tell me about that? Do you risk it again, or you think?
Well, a lot of the problems is that you probably had bad material. It's only, I would say, in the last 5 years where they have really perfected the use of how to create these substances so they don't have any toxicity in them. And it's really the crap in them that I think it gives people a lot of bad trips.
Gotcha. Okay, well, let's not get too far off topic. Okay, we're here to talk about JFK and Mary Pinchot Meyer. And it's fascinating that you actually grew up with these people and your parents knew them. Okay, yes. Was your family aware of the affair before her death?
Oh, yes. Absolutely, yes.
Was her husband aware of this affair?
Yes.
Really?
And he was very upset about it.
Okay, I was about that. Was it accepted or was it interesting? Okay. So you left off that they had a teenage fascination with each other, and then how did they reunite?
Well, they actually lived very closely together out in McLean, Virginia, just across the Potomac River. And initially, it was JFK and Jackie who lived at Hickory Hill, the estate next to the Meyer house, which Ethel Kennedy and her family soon occupied. But before Ethel moved in there with her huge family, JFK and Jackie lived there. They left first to move into respective places in Georgetown. And then eventually, when Mary divorced her husband, she moved into Georgetown, and they only lived, a few blocks away.
Mm. So they rekindled their relationship at that point?
Yes. And that's where it really became a lot more substantial because, JFK with his interpersonal issues had a lot of problems with trust, but he trusted her. I think she was one of the people in his life that he really trusted the most, and she continued to prove to him that she was a substantial human being who was capable of understanding him in a way that most people didn't.
Fascinating. And you said that they had a vision for world peace. And what was this?
Well, during things like the Cuban Missile Crisis and the Bay of Pigs, problems with Russia and particularly with Cuba, it was really Mary who kept helping JFK realize, look, you've got to see the opportunity here. There is a real opportunity here to move beyond this in a way that you can become a highly influential and important president of our country. And I think, she, with the kind of support he got from her, he was able to take a number of risks on the world stage that he likely wouldn't have been able to take had she not been in his life.
That's fascinating, because I've lived my life by that no matter what problem you're in, no matter how bad your situation is, there's a resolution to every problem. But there's also a path. There's a resolution that will bring you to a point that you're even better off than before that problem started. It exists. You just got to find it and stay on path.
Yes, I agree totally.
Welcome to my TED Talk. Okay. But thank you for coming to my TED Talk. So then, what I don't even know what to get to next. One, my question would be, what was your family's reaction when you heard of the death? Or another question might be, what do you think the motivation for her death was?
Well, the motivation for her death was she realized very quickly why he had been assassinated and who did the deed. I mean, JFK was a sitting president who was assassinated by our own government, particularly the intelligence people. And the reason is because he was standing up on his own 2 feet, and he was not going to take orders from anyone.
Right, and she was so intimately involved with, I guess you're pointing the finger at CIA correctly, right? And that she was so intimately involved with Cord Meyer, and I think Angleton was her brother-in-law?
Angleton was a dear friend, close friend of Cord Meyer's.
Gotcha.
They were not related, but they were the same age. And they were, known figures with one another. Angleton was also the godfather of all 3 of the Meyer children.
Right. Okay, that's what I was thinking. Okay, great. Okay, so then what was the circumstances? So she had had intimate knowledge of the murder of JFK. Through her husband, you think, and through Angleton, she got this information?
No. What happened was, of course, she was totally devastated and shocked by the fact that he was assassinated. But instead of bemoaning the fact, she went to work, and she started using all her contacts in Washington to help her understand what actually had taken place in Dallas, who was behind it, who pulled the trigger. She kept a diary of all of these things, and she worked assiduously from the time he was assassinated in November of '63 until she was murdered 10 months later in October of 1964. She was going to go public with what she knew. And mind you, this was not just some blonde bimbo who had a story to tell. This was an extremely intelligent, well-educated woman who knew all about the nefarious nature of the CIA and what the CIA was up to. And she was ready to spill it.
Let's return back to Peter Janney for a second. Now, what was your age at the time of JFK's assassination?
Well, I was 17 years old.
Okay. You're well enough aware enough. Okay, at 17, right? And your dad's CIA. You know, like you just said, you're friends with Mary Pinchot Meyer. So, what was the whole world is seeing this chaotic situation in Dallas and Ruby and Oswald and all this not crazy stuff? What was the scuttlebutt amongst your crowd in D.C. at the time? What were people there saying?
Well, different factions had different things that they wanted to believe. You know, I don't think, you know, it was really known very thoroughly when the assassination took place in November of '63 that, you know, everyone all of a sudden said, oh, yeah, the CIA did it. You know, I mean, this really took, the public was so shocked by the event. And there were a few courageous researchers out there already. People like, for instance, Mark Lane, who wrote a couple of books about it. And, you know, Mark Lane hit the nail on the head. He understood some of the more important dynamics of what had taken place and why, and was putting together the pieces of the puzzle as to why would our own government want to kill a sitting president.
Peter Janney, I also respect Mark Lane very much. You know, but what do you make of his whole connection there at the People's Temple down there in Guyana? That's a pretty.
You have to refresh my.
Well, he was the attorney. He was down there at People's Temple, Jonestown, Guyana, when all those deaths took place. He was there present at the time. He was Jim Jones' attorney for $10,000 a month.
Okay. I mean, I believe you. It's just that isn't a story that I have spent a whole lot of time, you know.
No, because
looking up
I have the same respect for you for Mark Lane as far as investigation of JFK assassination. But just when I get into that other story about Jim Jones, I just got to say, hey, what's going on here? You know,
I understand. Yeah. I understand.
And that's what this whole thing, man, from beginning to end, is just one enigma after another. This whole JFK world and all that stuff. So why don't we get into what was the circumstances around Mary Pinchot Meyer's murder?
Well, as I mentioned a little while ago, ever since November of '63, she had started to really work very hard on her own research, and she kept a diary that she wrote in almost every day in terms of everything that she was discovering. And, you know, it was a way for her to continually refine her point of view in terms of making sense of all these little tidbits of facts that she was putting together. And I think at some point it just became so apparent to her as to the nefarious nature of what had taken place that she didn't want to see the people, the citizens of our country, continually duped by the story that the Warren Commission wanted to put out, that there was this lone nut, namely Harvey Oswald, who just managed to get off a couple of good shots from a building in downtown Dallas. There was so much more to the story than just that.
What resources was she using to research this information? Contacts, people she knew. What was the method of her investigation?
The real method of her investigation is that she knew all the players in Washington, and they respected her. This was not a blonde bimbo who was trying to just peddle a story. This was a very well-educated woman who came from a very respectable background and family, and she knew what she was talking about.
Was she sharing information with your mother?
No, because my mother was too wedded to my father, who was, you know, CIA blue and blue.
Gotcha.
And my mother did not have the courage in her character to really realize the depth of evil in terms of some of the things that our government was involved in.
Then again, back to Peter Janney. When you started working on this field of investigation and writing this book, you've been working on this book for a long time. The first version came out in 2012. We're up to the third version now. You haven't stopped.
That's right.
You haven't rested.
That's right.
Plus, you got the website, marysmosaic.net. What were your mom and dad, were they alive when and witnessed you off in this direction to expose all this?
Yes. And I had a very... in the late 1960s, as I was coming out of high school and going to college, I had a very tumultuous, conflicted relationship with both my parents because I was not buying in to all the crap that our government wanted us to believe, not only about, the Kennedy assassination, but any other number of things. And, I had a very strong independent streak in my being, which I honored totally. And, I spent a lot of time in college and post-college, just reading and really educating myself as to what was really going on, because I was not going to allow myself to be brainwashed.
Yeah. Did you ever have an opportunity to did they ever review your research and your work? Did they ever have that opportunity to give you their opinion of what your conclusions are?
Well, my father died before he was 60 years old in 1979.
Gotcha.
So I mean, he hated the fact that I was going to Vietnam anti-war demonstrations and getting arrested and things like that. My mother did get to see my book and read parts of it before she died. God, when did she die? I guess 2012.
Okay.
So, the answer is yes and no.
Yes, that they did review it, but no, they did not approve?
Well, my father didn't get to review it.
Yeah.
But my mother did, but she was very taken aback that I'd written this book. She didn't know what to make of it. But, she knew where I was headed because I was talking about it. And, so she had to confront at a certain point that her oldest son was a raving, rebellious lunatic of one degree or another.
Yeah. Well, I worry really, man, because they came from a different world. They red, white, and blue apple pie. You know what I mean. We can't expect. You're out there, burning the flag, man. Saying, "Oh, my son, what do you do?" Same. In '76, I started hanging out with the hippies in New York. So, I met H.A. Weberman in 1976. I was 14 years old.
Yeah.
Coup d'etat in America. Oh, my goodness. So why don't you give us an idea what the official story is, because we're almost halfway through the show, the official story of the circumstances around her murder and what you really think happened.
Well, I was away at boarding school when her murder took place. And I think in October of '64, I would have been 17 at that time. But the story was kept from me. In other words, I was up in New Hampshire. The murder took place in Washington, D.C. I didn't really get told about the story until the evening of Thanksgiving, when I returned home for Thanksgiving vacation. And that's when I learned that she had been murdered. And of course, one of the things that took place right after the murder is they had to find a patsy. And the government and the CIA were, interested in coming up immediately, and they tried to pin it on this black guy who happened to be walking around in the general area with his girlfriend, having a tryst. And, you know, this guy, Ray Crump, was arrested and went to trial a year later, but he was never convicted because he had this incredible attorney. Her name was Dovey Roundtree, and she features prominently in this story, and there's been a book written about her. There's a film already in Hollywood that's being written about her and her life. So this was, you know, it took a while to unravel all the crap and all the bad. I'm trying not to use curse.
It's hard, right?
It's hard. As you warned me to, I would have been using other words in another situation. But you understand
I know the frustration,
my point of view here. And so I think, you know, after 30 or 40 years, I was one of the main people who pulled together all the factual information, all the clues into the book that I wrote, because, you know, I spent about, you know, 8 to 12 years of research before I actually wrote the book.
Yeah, and the book we're talking about is Mary's Mosaic, the CIA conspiracy to murder John F. Kennedy, Mary Pinchot Meyer, and their vision for world peace, the third edition. 4.5 stars on Amazon, 1,700 reviews. This book is no joke. marysmosaic.net. You can find information there as well. I want to go back up a little bit, okay, to the tone, the mood of that Thanksgiving reunion with your family. You're back from college, at least my old bedroom, you know, all this kind of stuff, right? And what was the tone of them telling you this story? There had to be some guilt in their voice telling you this story. Hey, son, our friend is dead. And
well, you have to remember that evening at Thanksgiving dinner, my mother didn't want to go anywhere near what actually happened. She had bought into hook, line, and sinker that, you know, Mary had been murdered by this black guy, and that it was likely a sexual assault in one way or another. And I remember the dinner so vividly because I spent many years in psychotherapy, and I kept going back and really just teasing out so many different little tidbits and dimensions of what took place at that dinner. My father didn't say a damn word. He just stared vacantly off into silence. And of course, it's my contention that he knew what had happened, but he sure as hell wasn't going to tell my mother.
Yeah, and just imagine, too, your dad's thinking, hey, they killed my friend's wife. They could kill my wife, you know?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
I could just imagine. I could just imagine that night, what that must have been like. So, what do you think really happened that evening?
Well,
the murder.
You know, I didn't know, but what I did know was that I was very shook up when I heard this story at dinner. And in retrospect, having gone over this many times for a number of years, I knew it was all crap. Sure. That wasn't the truth of what happened, and I had to excuse myself from the dinner and go to my room and just lay down and breathe and kind of take in what was going on. And I was in shock. There's no other way to say it. And, you know, from then on, I had to learn how to live with this for a number of years. The way it got really serious for me is that in college, I had started using psychedelics, and on one of my early trips, Mary showed up in my consciousness and started talking to me, and we started having conversations. and she was trying to, awaken me and bring me up to speed. And those were very, very important moments. I mean, this was going on, in 68 and 69, at the height of the psychedelic era, at the height of the, anti-war, anti-Vietnam War movement, peace movement that was going on. I mean, the joint was jumping. Yeah. There's no other way to say it.
I tell you, so much of your story. I've interviewed St. John Hunt, the son of E. Howard Hunt.
Yes, I know St. John.
Oh, well, there you go. Yeah, I've interviewed him so many times. And he tells a story about how William F. Buckley came and took away him and his brothers, and his brothers and sisters. He spirited them away. And his poor mother got killed in a plane crash. It was suspicious as hell.
Right.
Can you even call it suspicious? It's as obvious as hell. But just so much of your story reminds me of his. Like a kid growing up right in the middle of all this.
Yes.
Amazing.
And it shook up a lot of prominent. It shook up the children of a lot of prominent Washington families. Families who the father had very prominent roles in government. I mean, Craig McNamara, his father was, head of the Pentagon, Secretary of Defense during that time. So, from time to time, we commiserated together in little pieces here and there, but I don't think any of us really understood the sheer magnitude of what was taking place in Washington at that time.
Just to clarify, did you know St. John at the time, or you got to know him more recently?
I didn't know him at the time.
Okay.
It was more recently that I he and I got to know one another.
I can only imagine what those conversations are like, because you must have so much in common, I've become friends with Monkey Morales, to the son of Ricardo Morales, the son of Monkey Morales. That whole second generation, you know what I mean?
Yes.
Yeah. That must be fascinating.
It was a real education in and of itself to grow up in Washington, D.C. in that era because of what was taking place.
What were these circumstances of James Angleton rushing over to her place to steal this diary? What's going on? And how did we find out about that?
I can't remember. How did we find out about that? We found out about that from one of Mary Meyer's closest friends. Okay. Her name was Ann Truitt. And Bradley, and Angleton happened to be at Bradley's house, Ben Bradley's house, the night of the murder. And it was Bradley and Angleton who went to Mary's studio because the studio belonged to Bradley and he had a key to it. And that's where Angleton found the diary, which he absconded with immediately because of what was in it. And we know some of the things, not all of them, but some of the things that was in the diary from various people who, knew Mary, knew what she was doing or what she was working on, that kind of thing. And I don't think, I really think that her closest friends realized that there had been a just profound dastardly deed that took place with Mary Meyer's death, that it was not a random act of violence, that it was an intentional hit to get rid of someone who posed a very serious threat to what our government was trying to conceal, mainly what came out in the Warren Commission, which, no one with half a brain today really believes.
Yeah. So now Ben Bradley, who was the editor of the Washington Post at the time?
He wasn't the managing editor at that moment, but he was moving in that direction.
And he's the hero of Watergate to exposing Watergate. Did he immediately run to the editor and say, we've got a story here about this diary that was just stolen right before my eyes? And
he didn't know. He didn't know. No? I think, by the time I knew Ben quite well, yes. And he was very close with both my parents. And I knew, a couple of his children well. But, I really take Bradley to task in my book. And, a lot of people have told me that no one that they knew has ever understood the dynamics of what Bradley was up to until they read my book. And I'm very proud of that dimension of the story. In other words, really being able to pretty much zero in at more than 95% accuracy the chicanery that Bradley was involved with.
Well, describe that. Tell us about it.
Well,
we got time.
Bradley wanted to keep his stature within the Washington community. Sure. He had not yet ascended to the throne of being the executive editor of the Washington Post, which he wanted to be. So he wasn't going to do anything drastic to upset, his chances of really being able to assume the level of power that he wanted to have. And of course that meant he wasn't going to tell the truth of what he knew. And, I interviewed Ben Bradley twice. My first interview, I caught him at a good time. He was still very, very coherent. Mm. The second interview, clearly dementia had taken over a large part of his reality, and he wasn't helpful at all. But, I got him to, in the first interview, really, it allowed me to expose him for the fraud that he was, when it, for instance, came to his sister-in-law's death.
Oh, explain that. You mean Pinchot Meyer?
Yeah, he was married to Mary's sister for a while.
Gotcha.
And everyone, Bradley, like my family, we all knew the same people. We traveled in the same social strata within Washington. And so that was a bond in and of itself.
Well, then what about, this is kind of a curveball, but then, okay, Ben Bradley, Washington Post, later on comes Watergate. There is some, no matter the most objective perspective you could come onto this, is that there's some overlap of the Watergate burglars and that crowd and the JFK assassins. Minimal, at least, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I would agree with that.
Yeah. Okay. But I think it's even a little bit more. But if you go to, from my, but the thing is, then what's Ben Bradley's excuse then?
Well, you'd have to ask him, but he's not alive.
No, Peter Janney, I'm asking you. Well, what do you think, though? What do you think? What happened there?
Well,
Well,
in terms of Watergate, yeah. He had to grab that story. He couldn't run away from it because it was so apparent, and he understood that if he really exploited the story in the way that he wanted to, it would just make him look like the shining knight in armor that he wasn't, but wanted everyone to believe that he was. So I understood a lot of Ben's dynamics. I think, when I sent him a copy of the first edition of my book, I never heard from him. I didn't expect to, because there were things in the first edition that really pulled his pants down and exposed him to a degree that no one else ever had.
Yeah. And what do you make of the Woodward and Bernstein? There's a lot of people with complaints about the Woodward.
Well, I think they provided a very important service. That doesn't mean that they're pristine clean. But, in terms of what they reported and the material that they wrote about Watergate, they got it right, I think.
Yeah, I like that attitude. I have that way too of overlooking people's flaws and their weaknesses in certain ways, and respecting the accomplishments they did do. I can. We all have faults, you know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah. So okay. So now, what do you make now? All these. Have you been following the release of the Luna? What's Anna Paulina Luna and her release here? Have you been following any of the new revelations coming out?
With regard to Trump?
No, not to Trump. No, Anna Paulina Luna about the new JFK documents that have been released.
Oh, yeah, the ones that have just very recently been released, you mean?
Yeah, anything came out that corresponds with what you've been working on your practically whole life?
No, I think it's total crap.
Yeah.
I mean, first of all, let's be clear about something. Our government isn't going to come out and say, oh, yeah, we had to get rid of JFK because, he wasn't paying any attention to us, or, we wanted someone better, in that role. I mean, let's be realistic here. Our government is never going to admit that they assassinated a sitting president under any circumstances. But the point is that given some of the best JFK researchers who have, like myself to one degree or another, really spent a huge part of their life in getting to the bottom of this. And that's where the real pearls of wisdom are. And there have been some great books written about the assassination. Mine is just one indirectly, but still it carries a lot of weight because of the material that I was able to garner and put into the book. But I'm friends with several of the people who I think are the most respected researchers about JFK and his assassination, and it's pretty clear what happened.
Who would you count as the most respected in your opinion, and that have your most respect?
Douglas Horne.
Okay.
Yep. He was chief analyst for military records on the Assassinations Record Review Board. He's written a couple of books of his own. I think he really has been able to put together so many disparate facts, about the JFK assassination, but all of the lying and duplicity that went in to what actually happened. And he's a very good friend of mine. I mean, I've known Doug now for a number of years. I've worked with him a couple of things. I would say he is right at the top. There are a few others. James D. Eugenio. I don't like him much as a person, but
I've had him on a few times as well. Yeah, I like him.
Yeah. I do respect a lot of the work that he's done. Not all of it, but definitely a lot of it. And he's a big friend of Oliver Stone's, as am I, in terms of helping Oliver, for instance, really get the story right. There are a bunch of really high caliber researchers out there who really will not let go of the truth. They aspire to knowing as much dimensionality of the truth around this event in history as anyone in my lifetime.
As this, the research of the JFK researcher community, as it goes on in years and years, do you find more confusion, more misinformation, or you think that people are narrowing down and getting closer to the truth?
The latter.
Yeah. Okay. Now today,
look, when you boil this down, okay, to the essential facts, the intelligence community of our government murdered JFK.
Yeah.
That's all. I mean, that is the most shivering revelation here. Our own government assassinated a sitting president. And that's inescapable from my point of view now, given what we know and given the level of research that has been put together around this.
Yeah, and it also seems, too, that the same fairly small crew of guys, Iran-Contra, Mena, Arkansas, seem to be all those assassinations all throughout that whole period. It seems to be that same crew of guys over and over with those dirty hands doing the dirty work. Yeah, over and over. Yes,
I would agree. I would agree with that.
Yeah, and coming out of National Security Agency, in my opinion. While we're moving on. So today, as we record this, good old James DiEugenio and Oliver Stone and Jefferson Morley are attending a hearing for Andrea Paulina Luna in regards to this. Are you going to be watching that today? Because I hear you're busy. Your phone's ringing off the hook over there. You're going to be watching that today?
No.
Okay, why not?
No, I'll read about it.
Yeah.
But, listen, I've got 2 films in the works, 1 documentary, 1 Hollywood bio-series on this story of my book. I am just swamped with work, and I have to, also take time to rest and sleep and
dude, I hear you.
Take care of myself.
I know.
I mean, this stuff can eat you alive very quickly.
And wait, also too, there are repercussions for this kind of work. Have you suffered any kind of pushback you're pushing up against people that are related to you?
Well, there was a period of time in my life where I went to bed at night just shivering with fear. And, several people, well, not several, but I would say 2 or 3, who were helping me and really knew some of what was going on in Washington, told me in no uncertain terms, Peter, you got to realize you're being watched and that you are a danger to the overwhelming authority of what our government is about. And, we're going to continue to tell you this because we want you to know and be able to, plan accordingly at any given moment. But, you are being watched.
Yeah, and all the planning in the world, if they can make planes drop out of the sky. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
When payoffs are in the middle of a payoff. You know what I mean? That a lot of people seem to know about. And then the FAA director gets replaced while they're still picking up the debris. Right in front of our faces, man, right? Like we're fools,
Yes, I know.
Maybe we are.
It's a very dangerous time. And, I mean, from my point of view, Donald Trump is the reincarnation of Adolf Hitler in terms of his level of evilness and, what he would like to do.
I could not agree with you more. I think that right now, you seem to be several years older than me, but I think right now this is the most dangerous time I've lived in my lifetime, and that I've been my own personal concerns. We've only got a couple of minutes left. Now, you say you got a bunch of films and things coming out. Can you give us any kind of preview on that? What to look forward to?
Well, the documentary is going to be made first. The person who's making the documentary is a man by the name of Langdon Page. He's already won some very serious coveted awards in Hollywood for his documentary on Alexei Navalny, the Russian dissident.
Okay.
And I am just delighted that my producer, who knows him, was able to snag him for this position because it's telling me that there's going to be a serious documentary made about this story and about how I put it together in my book. In terms of the Hollywood bio series, Apple, it'll be on the Apple platform. Leo DiCaprio's dad, George DiCaprio, is really pushing hard for this. he really believes in this story, and he actually will twist Leo's arm to play JFK when the time comes. As to whether Leo will eventually do that, it's anybody's guess. But, the point is to understand that there is some real A-list Hollywood muscle behind these films, and that's what is most important to me.
Yeah, it's so important that you really watch your step and all this stuff, because we've seen the smearing of Bill Hamilton from The Octopus Story and Maria Terry. We've talked about that on this show. They seems like especially like Netflix and a lot of these streaming companies are out there to put out their own version of reality, to rewrite history, and it seems like they're putting a lot of great effort into that. So you got to really be on your guard with these characters out there. Only got a couple of minutes left. We're talking to Peter Janney. marysmosaic.net. Check that out. And the book we're talking about is Mary's Mosaic, the CIA Conspiracy to Murder John F. Kennedy, Mary Pinchot Meyer, and the Vision for World Peace. It's the 3rd edition. I'm sorry?
Yes, correct.
And keep an eye out for these movies. Mr. Peter Janney, we got about 1 minute left. 2 minutes. What do you want to leave us with?
Well, I'm just delighted that you and I have conducted this interview, because I think this really, this is a bigger story than me or the book. This is a kind of pictorial representation of a period of American history that all American citizens should be acquainted with, because it's important to know what your government is really up to. Not what they want to sell you, but what they are really doing.
And Peter Janney, I have the same sentiments. I've really enjoyed meeting you. I've loved this interview. Anything you ever want to come and promote on this show, you have an open invitation. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much.
Yes, sir. Good night.
Good night.